Hello there. We are in London again today and we're looking at a very interesting space. We start out in Greenwich. Now this is in southeast London. It's a sort of high point, as you can see, looking down on the city below. Here at Greenwich is the observatory, the Royal Observatory, where the so-called prime meridian is, which means the zero line, longitude, isn't it? Not latitude, but the longitude zero, which means that if you're standing on one side of this line, sort of imaginary line, then you're in the Western Hemisphere, and if you're on the other side, you're on the Eastern Hemisphere. So it's kind of where the two halves of the globe are joined, runs through this building. Historically, I think it ran through the telescope. It's all to do with the kind of historical importance of this area as far as mapping the world, mapping the stars, all that kind of stuff. You know how it is, a long time ago. Actually, the view from here is kind of quite spectacular, and you could, if you were that kind of artist, just sit up there and paint that horizon line. I'm more interested in getting up close. So I'm down here walking towards what's called the Old Royal Naval College, which is a very interesting building. This area was once a palace, but got converted and rebuilt. All this stuff was then rebuilt in the 1690s, so, you know, a long old time ago, and designed by Christopher Wren, who's kind of one of the big names in architecture in London back in the 16s and early 17s. And it was originally built as a naval hospital when hospitals were not really a thing. There was a war happening and a lot of injured sailors were coming back into London, and people realized that something had to be done, and they built a hospital. I think one of the nice stories about that is that it is said that when they asked Christopher Wren to do it, Christopher Wren being the biggest architect of the day, he did St Paul's, he did lots of the churches of London after the Great Fire in 1666, so he was a really big name. And when they asked him to do it, he said, yeah, willingly, I'll do that. But don't pay me for it. I don't need money. Let's just get these sailors better, which I think is a really sweet thing. Imagine how many man hours goes into producing architectural sort of designs for something like this. And it's been designed as if it was something, you know, really important place, a really dignified place. So respect to him for that. It stayed a hospital, I think, for 150, maybe 200 years, and then became the Royal Naval College, as it's now known as the Old Royal Naval College, because it's not a Royal Naval College anymore. So it spent another couple of hundred years training the next generation of sailors. It's right by the Thames, so you can literally kind of move from this college down to the Thames and sail off, I suppose. Now it's a kind of museum. It's a multiple venue thing. There's a Greenwich University has a part of it, which they have a music faculty in. There's cafes, because isn't there always cafes? There's even a little shop. So it's a kind of tourist attraction now. And it's relatively, well, I wouldn't say unknown, that's silly, but it's not the kind of place that has the queues outside of it. It's a little bit further away from the middle of town than other places are. So you have to kind of make the effort, a little bit more effort to get there. And Greenwich is a really interesting little day trip, I would say. It's worth spending a day there. There's lots of other things that one can do. Anyway, on this day I arrived, I had some time and I thought I might even do a couple of drawings. I did a first drawing and then the rain came. And then this is my second drawing because I'm now undercover. And the original plan was, let's just be undercover, because I could see on my weather map that there was a rain band coming. One of the things that Londoners have, sensible people that they are, is they all have one of those apps on their phone that shows a sort of up-to-date radar that shows where the rainstorms are, so you can plan your day very precisely. We have to leave in 5 minutes time before the rain comes, is something I'll often say. So anyway, I'm undercover here because I know there's a band of rain coming, albeit momentary, and it gives me a really interesting view. So it's a good opportunity to talk momentarily about composition. Composition is one of those kind of magical things that in the past, an older sort of generational drawer would have made a big song and dance over composition, that sense of how to frame a view. In this case, you've got obviously the dome as the ultimate sort of hero of the view, but you've got the columns in the foreground. So we're looking through something in the foreground at something important in the distance. So there's a clear kind of hierarchy between those two elements. But I think composition's become a much easier conversation over the last 20 years because of mobile phones, because of camera phones specifically. When you hold your phone up and you're taking a photograph, if you're the kind of person who thinks, hang on, I'll just move it slightly to the left so I can get that bit in, or if I tilt it down, I get the whole person in, not just the head in the middle of the image, if you see what I mean. If you're the kind of person that makes those little micro adjustments in order to just make that image look that little bit more nice for you, you know, more pleasing, then you're doing composition. And once you've done that, you know, with 100 photographs, it becomes relatively instinctive. So when I was undercover in this little colonnade, looking from underneath one dome through the colonnade to the other dome, it was as if you're taking a photograph. In fact, you'll see the photograph on the left hand side from that same view, and you could see how it is the kind of image you would take if you were a tourist there walking through. You'd say, oh look, there's a nicely framed view, a view of a thing through a thing. It's a classic, isn't it? Like photographs through an arched doorway or something like that. That sense of, there are certain places in the world, certain kind of views where if you watch kind of a tourist walking past, almost every single one will take that same photograph of that famous thing through this archway, that kind of moment. Like if you go to the Taj Mahal, there's a particular view from the entrance gate all the way through to the Taj itself that everybody who goes there takes the same photograph. And no one thinks, oh, that's obvious, you know, I'm taking the same photograph as everybody else. They all think, God, that looks great. And they're proud and pleased. So if you take photographs with your phone, composition is not something you need to be afraid of. You just need to engage the same part of the brain. That's the trick. And that isn't immediate. You're going to have to think about it. You have to say, where would I take this photograph from? How would I kind of position things? Now, as you can see from the drawing, we've started out with white paper. It's actually the Molotov acrylic friendly paper, which I bought an A3 pad of, and I'm just sort of testing and seeing how I feel about it. And I'm kind of enjoying it so far, but early days. And I've gone in with my Indigraph pen. I have done a few basic kind of pencil structural lines just to kind of give, you know, bare bones. And you can probably see here that I probably didn't do enough bare bones. Can you see the columns, the capitals of the columns, the top bit of the columns? Can you see how the two on the right just about work together, but they don't line up with the one on the left? And I've just discovered that as I've drawn it. One of the, I guess you could say problems, but you know, I'll come back, change the word in a minute. One of the problems you have when you open Sketch in the way I do, that it's super immediate. You just, you know, I'm a big believer in following the word sketch through to the end, you know, that sense of just go for it. And there will be errors. I mean, take that column on the left, which is the bottom column. Look at the bottom right-hand side of where the kind of side of the column comes. See how that line continues? Now, that's an error, and it's a completely 100% understandable error. The capital at the top, the fact it doesn't line up with the other two, if you kind of follow the lines along, it's kind of as if it's a lower column or it hits the top soffit in a different place. It's a completely understandable error. And that's the trick to sketching, really, is to say to yourself, there's going to be errors because it's completely understandable there's going to be errors. Look, this column doesn't line up. Look, that line went on too far. I mean, imagine the kind of person that would draw a line and every single line would be exactly in the right place and exactly the right length. That'd be magical, wouldn't it? So if that worries you, if you're not the kind of person who can live with an error in that way, and there are people like that. I mean, in fact, I was a person like that once, you know, you just move on. But anyway, if you are a person like that, then you would spend more time on the pencil guidelines. You would draw in the columns, which I didn't really do. I just kind of went, they're going to be there. I was just throwing down enough lines that I always say, I wanted to make sure that the drawing sat on the page correctly. What I don't like to do is start a drawing, and then by the time you get to the bottom, as it were, I mean, imagine here where you've got that near balustrade. If I'd started from the dome, and by the time I got to the balustrade at the bottom, which is in the foreground, it didn't fit on the page, that would have annoyed me. That would have been a mistake, and I wouldn't have forgiven myself for it. So having the top of the dome and the bottom of the balustrade in the foreground in the page, that's my priority. Having the columns there, okay, fine, that's important to me. Having the columns line up on the capitals, it's not a priority in the same way. I do have to fix it. And as I'm going through this process, I'm kind of thinking to myself, I wonder how I'm going to fix this. I'm not going to worry about it because you just don't know how important a mistake is until further on in the process, because sometimes it just kind of goes away because your eye is so focused on one particular part of the sketch that where there are errors, they're just like background, or kind of on the periphery. They no longer seem important. They seem important early on because you're looking at them and staring at them and thinking, oh my god, I drew that line wrong. But by the time you've done all the color and everything else, they become less so. In the case of this, as you'll see from the image top left of the final piece, I decide just to shadow out the whole of that kind of underside of the colonnade, and because I've shadowed it out, it just takes it away. And I even push the sky into blue, which happens quite late on, to again accentuate the columns really. So I didn't start with the idea that the columns themselves would be the heroes of the piece. I started very much with, it's all about the dome, and this is just foreground, the columns. But because of the way the columns went, I accentuated the kind of shaft of the column, the main bulk of the column, and by doing that took emphasis away from the top and bottom of the column by shadowing them out. And as I say, I don't know I'm going to do that yet. I'm just kind of in the process of working out, and the back brain is quietly kind of thinking to itself, at some point in this drawing we're going to have to fix this. Now, we've already gone off the Indigraph stage, but let me go back and talk about Indigraph for a second, because this is an interesting pen and I get asked about it a lot. It's one of those things that, I mean, when it came out about 4 years ago, it was like I saw it on the YouTube channels, artists going on about it, and I was thinking, that's the pen for me. It's a pen that can take India ink, which means it can take waterproof ink. And if you have a fountain pen, you put waterproof ink in it, it will mess up that fountain pen, as in 99% of all fountain pens. They're not designed to take India ink because India ink has pigment in it. So in other words, little particles. And little particles of kind of sooty debris inside an ink, which makes it waterproof, gets stuck inside the nib of a traditional fountain pen and clogs it up really easy. And that could be a really annoying thing to clean. So Indigraph has a really simple solution to this. It's basically, it has a special cap, the cap that you put over the nib when you finish using the pen. It has a little water reservoir in it that you fill up once every 3 months or so, and it keeps the nib moist in a kind of microclimate kind of a way. So whenever you open the nib up, it's always ready to go, and it's never dried out. And it's the simplest solution and the most ingenious, and it seems to work every single time. I've now ended up buying 4 Indigraph pens because they're just so much fun to use. And when they first came out, I was thinking, this is going to go crazy. Everyone's going to be using an Indigraph pen. And if you go on YouTube, look at the reviews, type it in, you'll find that 4 years ago, there was a whole handful of reviews. And then it all seemed to go quiet. And you see urban sketchers now just using ordinary fountain pens. And you kind of think, wow, man, I don't understand why everybody doesn't use this pen. I mean, it is sort of, forgive me, it is like £100 or I think £80 or $80, that kind of number, depending on what kind of nibs you get. But the point of a fountain pen, you probably realize this, of course, is that the nibs you can change. The nibs cost about £10, €10, $10, that kind of number. In fact, even maybe slightly less than 10. So imagine you've got it's like a car where you can change the tires when the tires wear out, It's kind of part of the wear and tear. If you have a nib, a fountain pen nib, you might want to change that nib either to get a different style of nib, maybe wider, or because it was, you just didn't like the nib anymore, it was getting too scratchy or some such thing. You'd had it for a few years. So you just unscrew the nib and you replace it. Then you've got a brand new pen. So the barrel and the cap is the thing you're kind of paying for that you keep forever. It's never going to be thrown away. And the nib is something you change for $10, which is like no problem as far as I can tell. Anyway, that's my little kind of rant on Indigraph, which I thought would take over the world of the urban sketcher. And I keep seeing people on YouTube using weird, it's sometimes much more expensive. I mean, people go on about, well, I won't name brands, that'd be rude of me, but they go on about brands where you just think, but that can't do waterproof ink. Or in a case, I haven't explained this bit, why is waterproof ink so important? Well, so you can do line and wash. I can do a black line, it's waterproof, that means I can do watercolor over the top of it, and that black line's going to stay put. It's not going to go all kind of runny, it's not going to blur, it's like permanent. And of course, half the people listening to this are going to be screaming, but hang on though, what about just using a fine liner, a fiber point pen, which comes in all the 0.1, 0.2 kind of permanent pens? Yeah, by all means, you absolutely can, but you have to kind of work quite hard with them, I think, to give them character. Whereas a fountain pen comes with character built in. Every mark you make is kind of singing and dancing, and it just has sort of energy to it. It's something that if you've never used a fountain pen, it's hard to feel the difference. I guess, oh god, bad analogy, but it's like the difference between driving a manual Alfa Romeo and an automatic Fiat. There you go, that's as precise as I can get. It's the difference between having kind of control, which comes with certain problems, and it means it's more fragile. It means you've got to really think more. It means you can't maybe relax because you're driving, as the Americans would say, a car with stick shift. But if you're into it, that gives you a level of control, a level of connection, really, a level of feel for the process. You're no longer just piloting a machine, going off to the shops. You're actually in control of it. You're as one with it, and it gives you a very different feeling. That's what a fountain pen is like. That when you get connected to it, there's something magical happens. So you'll see I'm using my established process, really, of using acrylic paint pens, which I've been only doing for a year or so now, but still it's become a big part of my process just because I like it so much. I'll always have 10, 12 acrylic paint pens in my bag, and I'm adding to that this sort of new thing slightly. Instead of using watercolor so much, I'm using ink, and I'm using the ink like a watercolor. So I've actually watered it down a bit, in other words. So you'll see I've got a little jam jar on the right hand side, the kind of thing you get when you go to some breakfast place and they give you that little pot of jam or jelly, as the Americans would call it. That little tiny thing where you think it's a very dinky sweet little jar, and you eat all the jam up and then put the jar in your pocket because that's useful. And you put a little tiny dribble of ink in it, and you put a little tiny dribble of water, kind of half and half, and you get this intense watercolor like fluid. And the benefit of it is, with watercolor, of course, you're kind of continuously going back and forwards to the pan, wetting the pan in a little kind of square of hard color. You're wetting it, and kind of the chances of getting the same color type the whole way through is really slim. It tends to vary a lot, and it also takes a bit more time. Whereas if in the case of this, I've got like 3 or 4 with me today, sort of a warm color and a blue color and a white, I think, and a black. So nothing particularly complex, but just enough that I know that if I'm going to do shadows, they're going to be blue. And I've got a bottle that allows me to do that really conveniently and quickly. I don't particularly want to spend a whole load of time mixing color to do shadow. It just seems a bit of a waste of time. I've got drawing to do, and maybe other drawings to do that day and other places to be. So I just, if I know I want a blue shadow, give me a bottle of blue and I'm off. It's easier. I wonder why they don't sell watercolor as little bottles of fluid. Obviously you get tubes, you get the half pans, but you don't get little bottles of watercolor, do you? Well, maybe you do. Maybe I'll invent that, and maybe it'll go crazy. Now you'll see I'm into the what I call the outlining stage. These are perimeter lines, so it's an acrylic pen, so it's riding over the top of everything else. The point of acrylic pens, by the way, is their level of opacity. It means they're super solid in the density of color, as opposed to like a alcohol marker, like a Tombow or something like that, which is kind of transparent. So if I lay a Tombow alcohol marker on top of this blue, you'll see the blue through that Tombow. Whereas if I use an acrylic pen like this, which is an Arrtx acrylic pen, if I use that over the top of the blue, it will just show as the black line on top, in this case black line. In fact, you'll see me in a second using Tombow to exactly that effect, where alcohol markers are transparent or translucent and acrylic markers are opaque or solid color. So they therefore have, you use them both, as in both of them bring a different effect. A Tombow is brilliant for kind of intensity of shadows, and in fact I often call them my shadow pens. But the black sort of acrylic line is wonderful for, as we say, perimeter lines, which means accentuating the kind of outside line of things. Now, if you're kind of careful with it, can you see how I've done the columns, where there's a line, a solid line on the left hand side of each of the columns, a darker line, so that line becomes like an accentuation of that shadow. Can you see how the lines on the top of those kind of coffers, they're all completely outlined, and the lines on the bottom, they're kind of just around the sides of the two kind of brick walls either side of the balustrade in the middle. That sense of putting that line in to kind of hold things together, but also to kind of to allow the fineness, to not just outline everything, basically, is my point. To allow some lines to remain fine, so that it isn't just a case of, well, why didn't you use the thick pen in the first place, would be the question. Why use the thin line and then use the thick line over the top of the thin line? Well, it's because the thin line is there to tell you where things are, and that bolder line is you saying, I want that part to be bolder now and jump forward. And you can see the effect is, when we were drawing this before, just as fine line, it was just the view on the page as a drawing. Now when we've got the darker line, we've got the shadow, the columns are suddenly moving towards us. They're now definitely foreground, and that dome is starting to recess. Now this is an interesting balance between these two states, because I'm now going to use a kind of super warm colour, albeit too yellow at first, on that dome in order to pull that forward again, because it's one of those bat and ball games, you know, with the bat and the ball on the elastic string, where it goes backwards and forwards, bang, 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 that kind of thing. It's a bit like that, where you've got the foreground, you've got the background, and they're both important to you, and you keep saying, we're going to add a bit more to the foreground, no, hang on, that's a bit too much, bit more to the background, bit more to the foreground, backwards and forwards, increasing both levels until you get that sense of the overview, sort of the balance between these two. This is not something which anybody's born with, you know, you don't kind of know where the balance will be. What you've got to do is just kind of look for it, and I mean that in terms of with your eyes. So, for example, at this stage, I think the drawing's virtually done, and the sky, you'll notice, is white. It takes me a long time to realise that there is an advantage to bringing those columns through even more, the whiteness of the columns. And the only way to bring the columns through as whiter than they are now is to make the sky beside them darker. And that sense of pushing the background to accentuate the foreground, you know, and vice versa, is kind of bring a composition together. We come back to the idea of composition. I mean, that's the advantage of a sketch as opposed to a photograph, of course, is that in a photograph it's composition and that's all really, and then it's everything else is down to, is it a nice day, is the sun in a nice place, have you got a good, you know, camera or whatever. All those things are outside of your control, really. The only thing you have control of is where you stand and when you press your finger on the button. Whereas when you do a sketch, that's just the start. To choose the compositional position, that's just the first 1% of the decision. Everything else is about the tools you use and how you use them, how you accentuate the view you see, you know, what colours you bring to it. I mean, none of the colours I'm using here are realistic to the colours of the view. I mean, that's inherent really when you're using acrylic paint pens, when you're using the process I'm using, because I'm not really going to spend the time to kind of mix the colour of the stone. I genuinely don't care about the colour of the stone. It would be kind of just, I'd feel like I was wasting my life force. But what I want to do is create impact and drama and enjoy the process of doing that. So here's the finished drawing. And I quite enjoyed myself. I enjoyed learning from my mistakes. I didn't enjoy the yellowy orange colour. I'll correct that next time I do something. And I also didn't enjoy the exact shape of the dome. I think I got that slightly the wrong proportions. But other than that, there's a lot of character to the drawing, a lot of kind of fluidity and fun. And I enjoyed that. I think it was fitting. If you've been listening all the way to the end, thank you very much indeed. You're a star.